I suppose then, I mean, the obvious question, the question that people hostile or frightened of the Chinese revolution, this quantum leap that they're making, which is undoubtedly bringing huge benefits to vast number, millions and millions of people in China and elsewhere. But it's the politics that they don't like. And I guess this is an interesting feature of, well, this thing that I'm interested in with yourself, because as you rightly say, to be an anthropologist, you have to be a relativist at any level in order to understand and inhabit the other worlds. You've got to kind of take on this, their other, and try and see things, and through the comparative method and all the things you've talked about. But there are things about the Chinese government which doesn't sit well, or is totally different from what we're used to in, say, Britain and America. And with all its flaws, it's well, I suppose the question is, how far does your relativism allow you to take the whole of the Chinese thing and say, yeah, well, that's the way they do it. It's different from ours. There's things that we don't like, but there's things about ours that we don't like. I mean, just as you say, you have difficulties as being because you're rational, because of the way you've been brought up, that magic and witchcraft, although you understand that it's just as reasonable to a culture, to this civilization as it not believing it is to us, but you found it difficult to fully believe in magic, if you like. How far from where you sit as a, an English professor in a democratics, can your relativism extend far enough to say, well, you've just got to understand that it's a different system and it's fine? Or is it possible, even from an anthropologist point of view, to criticize that and say, actually, I don't go with that? I suppose it's I guess this was raised when I was thinking about the headhunting in the Nagas, and I was thinking of that, and I was thinking, well, what? I mean, and I was thinking of Star Trek as well. Star Trek, Captain Kirk's got this thing where, you go from planet to planet and you can have a look, but you mustn't change it. You mustn't do anything to it. Even if it's, whatever's going on there is not to your liking, you mustn't change it. And I can see that if you're analyzing or you're trying to look at something, and it's very much, but is it actually possible to do that as a human, as opposed to the anthropologist?
Well, as you know, this is, we come back to Ernest Gellner, because this was one of his big questions, relativism. And his answer, and I'm really realizing that I haven't read enough or thought enough about Ernest to be sure, but certainly in his writings, what seemed to happen to him was that he would go a certain way towards relativism and say, well, yes, I understand and I appreciate Islam or the Soviet Union or something. And then he'd get to a point and suddenly say, no, I'm not going any further. And indeed, I absolutely abhor absolute relativism. And that's why I hate late Wittgenstein and so on and so on. So there was a kind of moral and emotional revulsion whereby you almost felt his identity and certainly his philosophical assumptions were challenged in a way where he became almost irrationally opposed to it and dogmatic. He just said, it's rubbish, Alan, we can't begin to think like that. Now, my feeling is that there is two weaknesses about that. One is, how can you decide that it's rubbish until you understand it? So before you put up the shutters or the barriers, you have to get inside the system properly. And that is the duty of an anthropologist. If when say when the British anthropologists, some of whom I knew, arrived in Nagaland, when they, my teacher, who was one of the great experts on headhunting, Vera Hammondorf, went to Nagaland and worked with the Konyaks before the Second World War. He didn't immediately, when they told him all about headhunting and even took him on sort of headhunting raids, maybe, or certainly J.P. Mills, his friend, they didn't start straight away saying this is nonsense and you mustn't do it and I disapprove and stop it. He tried to understand it, and indeed he did understand it, and that was the great beauty of functionalism. I mean, headhunting is integral to the society. Without it, they are not Nagas of the old style. It's not because they are cruel and horrible people, but it's part of their ritual system. It's no more stupid and cruel than the Chicago slaughterhouses in America. It's part of our system to kill millions of animals, but looked at from Mars, it seems pretty bizarre. They kill other human beings, we kill other animals. So so functionalism teaches you to be, at least understand what it's doing for the society and therefore half accept it. And for China or someone like that, the problem with most Western people, and Ernest included, they don't even want to bother to start. They know they hate it. Many of my friends and family are the same. You mentioned China and they start off about Tiananmen Square or Uyghurs, and you try and explain the great, the 700 million people out of poverty or something, and they say, no, that's all irrelevant. We don't mind if people are basically happy and if it's got a higher approval rate of the government than anywhere in the world. No, that's irrelevant. It's human rights. They don't have human rights or democracy. Well, okay, but first of all, just the willing suspension of disbelief, the willing suspension of criticism is the first stage. The next stage is, once you've done that and you understand it, what do you do? Now, there are some things which you understand, which, given my background, you cannot accept. The foot binding of women, which went on for 600 years in China, so that millions and millions of Chinese women had their feet broken, bound up, and for the rest of their life, they were in constant pain, hobbling around, unable to do this and that. Now, I understand it. I mean, it was sexual significance, it's social significance, it's a mark of status, it's a mark of domination of the male. And, I could write out 100 good reasons for having foot binding, but I still feel no foot binding. And as Erickson quoted the same, a quotation from Marshall Sahlins, we know why people believe in cannibalism, but we still say no cannibalism. We know why Sooty in India was there, but the British banned Sooty. So there are certain things which you understand that this is their custom, their tradition, and so on, but you still say no. And it's the same with everything in our lives. I am quite happy to a certain extent for people to eat meat, but I won't eat meat. I'm quite happy for people to eat beetroots, but I hate beetroot and I won't eat beetroot, or one or two other things. So,
beetroot, I love beetroot. I mean, we're going to have to fall out over that one.
I have my relativism, but I have my principle. No beetroot, no fat. So there are limits. But in the case of Chinese politics, I think I've made this idea. Anyone who's studied legal and political systems know that they have to be adapted to other features of the society. Its size, its history, its ideology, its family system, all those things. Now, politics doesn't float freely. The idea that you can go into Iraq or Libya, or now we are seeing Afghanistan, say, hey guys, you in Afghanistan, you had all these wars against British Empire and threw them out again and again in the 19th century. You had these wars against the Russians. You have a feuding tribal society, which is very confrontational. And the only way you can hold it together is by a very powerful arbitrary force of a kind of supreme leader, as it were. Hey guys, that's the past. We'll come in, we'll show you. Put out your ballot boxes, your millenarian cult. Build some schools. Pull out the ballot boxes. Buy hamburgers, and you'll become like us in your political system. Now, 20 years later, we've crawling out with our tail between our legs as we did in Vietnam. You can't do it like that, and you can't do it in the Middle East, which has similar feuding situations. And if that's true in little places like Afghanistan and Libya, Syria, Iraq, it's 100 times the case in China. China is, 5,000 years of history and civilization. It worked in a way that no other civilization has worked to preserve its political system for 2,000 years up till the present. And it works on the idea that you have a huge size of Western and Eastern Europe and Russia, Western Russia combined, a huge geographical area, which is not united, as I said, by anything except a written language and an educational system. What it is united is by a political system. Now, that political system historically is the only bureaucratic centralized political system in the world, whereby you have, from the Qin Emperor, you have a leader, a supreme leader, a powerful, super powerful man, the Qin Emperor. He has advisors who are selected on the basis of their merit through the educational system. They take the top level, as it were, night watchman in Adam Smith's metaphor. They take the decisions of how to keep the whole machine going. Large questions of international relations, superhighways, communications, money, whatever. They are the umpires, as it were, in the tennis match. Below them immediately, there are huge delegation of power to very powerful mayors, mandarins, regions. China split into regions, each of which is very powerful. And recently, of course, they've set up these autonomous regions based on ethnic minorities, which have almost carte blanche. We've been to a number of them. If you go to Guangxi or some of these other autonomous regions, they're run by the local ethnic minority. They have the government. And often when you get to that level or lower, to the very powerful mayors of huge cities the size of London, if you go to, as it were, Chengdu or Shanghai or Wuhan, these places are about the size, Chongqing is the size of, half the size of Britain, its population, 25 to 30 million people. And they elect a mayor through ballots, or maybe not at the mayor level, but I think in smaller cities and towns they do. So you have elective democracy at all the levels, not at the top, but all these levels. And then once you come, as we saw when we travel around China, if you come to the village level, say a small village like the one I live in, or even a small town, every year or 2 years, they elect their government, secret ballot elections. Admittedly, they have a party secretary who is very powerful and is there to make sure that it's all in line with the general policy. So if you start getting out of step too much, then there may be trouble. So there is unification, as it were, but huge amount of local democracy, even civil society at local and middle levels. Now, this is how they've run China for 2000 years. And what the Communist Party is doing now is exactly the same thing.